history is not a clean story. It is a collection of whispers.
We find fragments.
A broken pot, a strange carving on a stone, a bone buried in an unusual way. We try to piece them together. We try to understand the people who left them behind. But mostly we guess. We build theories on foundations of sand. Because for every fact we uncover, 100 questions bloom in the darkness. What were they thinking? What did they believe? Why did they do these strange things? We look at our own world. We have rituals for birth, for death, for marriage. We have traditions that make sense to us. But imagine someone 1,000 years from now. Imagine they find a plastic Christmas tree and a box of glass ornaments. What would they think? What bizarre religion did these people practice? They would be missing the context. They would be missing the stories, the songs, the feeling of a holiday. That is where we are with the ancient world. We have the artifacts. We have the bones. We have the ruins. But we are missing the context. We are missing the stories. And so we are left with rituals so bizarre, so alien to us, that they feel like they came from another world. We have found bodies with stones in their mouths. We have found giant temples built by hunter-gatherers who then deliberately buried their own creation. We have found skulls with plastered faces given new life after death. These are not just historical curiosities. They are windows into the human mind. They show us how different our ancestors were. But they also show us how similar they were. They feared death. They loved their families. They looked at the stars and wondered, and they tried to make sense of it all through ritual. These are the stories of those rituals, the ones we know happened, but we have almost no idea why. Number 15. Why did the world's first builders bury their own masterpiece? In southern Turkey, there is a hill. For a long time, people called it Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill. Local farmers would move rocks out of the way to plow their fields. They sometimes found old carvings, but nobody thought much of it. The hill was just a hill. A medieval cemetery, maybe. In the 1960s, some surveyors from the University of Chicago looked at it and decided it was nothing important. They saw some broken limestone slabs and assumed they were gravestones. They moved on. And then in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt came along. He had been working on a nearby site and read the short report from the 1960s survey. Something about it caught his attention. He went to Potbelly Hill. He saw the same limestone slabs the others had seen. But Schmidt saw something different. He recognized the stone as the kind of thing humans work with. And he knew almost instantly that this was not a cemetery. It was something else. Something much, much older. What Schmidt and his team uncovered changed everything we thought we knew about human history. Göbekli Tepe was not a hill. It was a massive man-made complex of stone circles. The stones were not simple slabs. They were huge, T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 16 tons. They were carved with incredible skill. There were images of foxes, snakes, boars, spiders, and vultures. The level of artistry was stunning. The real shock came from the dating. Using radiocarbon dating on organic material found at the site, they determined its age. Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BCE. That is 12,000 years ago. To put that in perspective, it is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. This was not just old, it was prehistoric in a way that defied explanation. At the time the accepted story of civilization went like this first, humans invented agriculture. They settled down in villages. This stability led to complex societies, which then led to religion, and the construction of large monuments and temples. Göbekli Tepe flipped that story on its head. The people who built this place were hunter-gatherers. There is no evidence of agriculture nearby. There are no signs of permanent settlement. No houses, no cooking hearths, no trash pits full of domestic waste. They found tens of thousands of animal bones, mostly wild game like gazelle and aurochs. This suggests the site was used for giant feasts. So hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly lived in small, nomadic bands, came together to build this. They quarried, moved, and carved massive stones with nothing but primitive tools. It would have taken hundreds of people, a huge amount of organization, and a shared purpose. The leading theory proposed by Schmidt himself before his death in 2014 is that Göbekli Tepe was the world's first temple, a religious center, a place where different groups could meet, perform rituals, and feast together. The carved animals might have been gods, spirits, or ancestral symbols. The T-shaped pillars might represent stylized human figures, perhaps ancestors or deities. But here is the truly bizarre part. The ritual we know almost nothing about. After using these stone circles for a few centuries, the people of Göbekli Tepe did something incredible. They buried them on purpose. They painstakingly filled the entire site with dirt, rocks, and animal bones. It took an enormous amount of effort, maybe as much effort as it took to build it in the first place. They created the very hill that hid their creation from the world for millennia. Why? Why would a culture build something so magnificent, so important, only to deliberately bury it? This is the central mystery. The act of burying it was clearly a ritual in itself. It was not a casual abandonment. It was a careful, deliberate act of closure. Some archaeologists, like those continuing Schmidt's work at the German Archaeological Institute, believe it might have been a kind of ceremonial decommissioning. Perhaps the rituals performed there were considered so powerful that the site needed to be sealed away when it was no longer in use. Or maybe a new religion or social structure emerged, and the old ways had to be physically and symbolically buried. It could have been an act of piety, a final offering to the earth or the spirits within it. Others have more speculative ideas. Some researchers have looked at the carvings, particularly one known as the vulture stone. They believe it might depict a cataclysmic event, like a comet strike. Perhaps the act of burying the site was a response to a real or perceived cosmic disaster. A way to put a terrible memory to rest, but, we have no written records, we have no language to decipher. All we have are the silent stones and the earth that covered them. The building of Göbekli Tepe was a ritual. The feasting was a ritual. And the burial, the final act, was the most mysterious ritual of all. They were not just leaving it behind. They were erasing it, but also preserving it. What powerful belief would compel people to spend generations building a sacred place, only to have their descendants spend generations unbuilding it? Was this part of the plan all along, a life cycle for a sacred site? Were they hiding it from a rival group or from angry gods? Or were they protecting it, turning it into a time capsule for reasons we can't even begin to imagine? Number 14, why did people keep plastered skulls in their homes? Around 9,000 years ago, in the ancient city of Jericho, people were doing something strange with their dead. Jericho is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It was a bustling Neolithic town, one of the first places where humans started to live together in large numbers. Archaeologists digging there have found layers upon layers of history. But in the 1950s, a British archaeologist named Kathleen Kenyon uncovered something deeply personal and unsettling. Under the floors of the houses, she found bodies. This was not unusual. Many ancient cultures buried their dead within the home. But some of these bodies were missing their heads. Elsewhere in the settlement, she found the missing skulls. But they were not just bare bones. They had been carefully, artistically modified. The skulls had been plastered. Someone had taken the skull of a deceased person, likely a relative, and used wet plaster to recreate their face. They filled the eye sockets with seashells, often cowrie shells, to give the impression of eyes. The traces of paint suggest they were colored to look more lifelike. The jaw was reattached, and the plaster was smoothed over the bone to look like skin. The result was a hauntingly realistic portrait of a person who had died long ago. This was not an isolated practice. Similar plastered skulls have been found at other Neolithic sites across the Levant, in places like Ain Ghazal in Jordan and Tel Ramad in Syria. It was a widespread tradition that lasted for hundreds of years. In total, archaeologists have found dozens of these skulls. They are considered some of the earliest examples of portraiture in human history. The process itself was a complex ritual. After a person died, their body would be buried, probably under the floor of the house. After the flesh had decomposed, the family would reopen the grave and carefully remove the head. Then, the intricate process of plastering and decorating would begin. Once finished, these skulls were not reburied. They were kept in the living spaces of the home. They were part of the family. But why? What did this mean? The leading theory is that this was a form of ancestor worship. These were not just any skulls, they were likely the heads of important elders, the founders of a family line. By preserving their faces and keeping them in the home, people could maintain a physical connection to their past. The ancestors were not gone, they were still present, watching over the living. They were a source of wisdom, protection, and identity. In a society without writing, these skulls might have been a physical record of a family's history and legitimacy. Having the skull of a great-great-grandfather in your home was a way of proving you belonged, that you had a right to the land and the house. The archaeologist Ian Queet has written extensively on this topic. He suggests that these rituals helped create a sense of community and permanence in these new large settlements. As people transitioned from nomadic life to settled farming, they needed new ways to define who they were and who their family was. The plastered skulls provided a powerful, tangible link to the past that helped solidify social bonds. But this explanation, while plausible, leaves so many questions unanswered. The skulls show signs of being handled over many years. Their plaster is often worn smooth in places. Were they brought out for special ceremonies? Were they consulted for advice? Were they simply part of the daily furniture of the house? The emotional experience of this is hard for us to grasp. Imagine living in a room with the recreated face of your dead grandmother staring at you from a shelf. Was it comforting? Was it frightening? And the selection process is a mystery. Not everyone was given this treatment. Most people were buried and left in their graves. Only a select few had their skulls removed and plastered. How were they chosen? Was it based on age, wisdom, social status, or something else entirely? And what happened to the rest of the body? It was left in the grave, headless. This suggests a strong belief that the person's identity and spirit resided in the head. The ritual eventually faded away. After a few centuries, people stopped making plastered skulls. We do not know why. Did their beliefs change? Did they find a new way to honor their ancestors? The skulls themselves were eventually retired. They were often buried in caches, grouped together under the floors of houses, as if they were finally being put to rest after a long service among the living. What did it feel like to hold the plastered skull of an ancestor? Was the ritual of creating one a moment of grief or a celebration of a life? Why did they choose shells for the eyes? And what did that specific choice symbolize? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, when they looked into those shell eyes, what did they believe was looking back? Number 13, why did people bury their dead under the living room floor? Imagine your home. Now, imagine burying your grandmother under the living room rug. Imagine burying your children under their beds. For the people of Çatalhöyük, this was normal. It was how they lived and how they died. Çatalhöyük is a massive Neolithic settlement in modern-day Turkey. It existed from about 7,500 BCE to 5,700 BCE. It was one of the world's first cities. Thousands of people lived there, but it was not like any city we know. There were no streets. The houses were all built right up against each other, like a honeycomb. People got into their homes through holes in the roof, climbing down ladders. The city was a single, sprawling maze of interconnected buildings. The archaeologist James Mellart first discovered the site in the late 1950s. His excavations revealed a society of incredible artistic and symbolic richness. The walls of the houses were covered in plaster and painted with elaborate murals. There were scenes of hunting, depictions of giant wild bulls, and geometric patterns. They also found small female figurines, which Mellart believed were evidence of a mother goddess cult, a theory now heavily debated. But the most bizarre aspect of life in Çatalhöyük was found under the floors. The people buried their dead directly beneath the living spaces. When someone died, a platform in the main room of the house would be dug up. The body would be placed inside, often in a tightly flexed fetal position. Then, the hole was filled, the floor was replastered, and life went on directly above the grave. The current head of excavation, Ian Hodder from Stanford University, has overseen decades of modern archaeological work at the site. His team has found that a single house could have dozens of bodies buried beneath it, accumulated over generations. The house was not just a home for the living, it was a mausoleum for the family's dead. People literally lived their lives on top of their ancestors. This was a complex, multi-stage burial ritual. There is evidence that suggests the bodies were not buried immediately after death. Some skeletons show signs of having been exposed to the elements for a time, perhaps on open-air platforms until the flesh was gone. Vultures and other scavengers would have cleaned the bones. This is supported by some of the wall paintings, which show large birds hovering over headless human bodies. After this process of excarnation, the clean bones were gathered and buried under the floor. But it gets stranger. Just like in Jericho, the head was often treated differently. Sometimes skulls were removed from bodies already buried under the floor, only to be reburied later, sometimes with a different body. In one famous case, a female skull was found cradled in the arms of an adult skeleton. Plastered skulls, similar to those from Jericho, have also been found, though they are much rarer here. It seems the head held a special significance and could be moved around, circulated among the living, or used in other rituals long after the person had died. Why did they live this way? The most common theory is that it was, like in Jericho, a powerful form of ancestor veneration. The ancestors were not separated from the living in a distant cemetery. They were an active, physical part of the household. Their presence under the floor anchored the family to that specific house. In a society where houses were built and rebuilt on the same spot for over 1,000 years, this created an incredible sense of continuity. The house was not just a building, it was a living entity, a history house that contained the family's entire lineage. Ian Hodder's research emphasizes this idea of the house as the central organizing principle of Çatalhöyük society. But the practical and emotional reality is staggering. What did the house smell like? While the bones were clean, the process of burial and reopening graves must have been intense. And what was the psychological effect of knowing your deceased relatives were just a few inches beneath your feet while you ate, slept, and raised your children? It suggests a relationship with death that is completely alien to us. For them, the dead were not gone. They were simply in the room below. Many questions remain unanswered. How did they decide who was buried where? Some houses have many bodies, others very few. Was it a sign of the family's status or age? And what about the practice of moving skulls? Was it to honor a specific person, or did the skull itself possess some power or spirit that could be transferred? Why did they stop painting the walls and burying the dead in their homes? Around 5700 BCE, the settlement was abandoned. But we do not know why. Did they feel comfort knowing their ancestors were literally supporting the foundations of their home? Was reopening a grave to remove a skull a traumatic event or a sacred duty? And what happened in those houses day after day in the constant, silent presence of the dead? Number 12, why did ancient Japanese culture make and break thousands of female figurines? In ancient Japan, long before the age of samurai and shoguns, there was a culture called the Jomon. The Jomon period lasted for an incredibly long time, from about 10,000 BCE to 300 BCE. These were hunter-gatherers and early farmers who were also some of the world's first potters. They created distinctive pottery with cord-like patterns, which is what Jomon means. They lived in settled villages, built pit houses, and had a rich spiritual life. We know this because they left behind thousands of mysterious artifacts, the dogu. Dogu are small clay figurines. Most are only a few inches tall. They are almost all female, or at least have female characteristics. They have wide hips, prominent breasts, and are often depicted as pregnant. Their faces are abstract and otherworldly. Some have huge goggle-like eyes that look like something from science fiction. Others have heart-shaped faces or triangular heads. They are incredibly varied and stylized. Archaeologists have found over 18,000 of them all across Japan. They are one of the most common artifacts of the Jomon period. But here is the bizarre thing. The vast majority of them are broken, and they were not broken by accident. They were deliberately, ritually broken and scattered. It is very rare to find a complete dogu. Often, a leg is snapped off, or an arm, or the head. What was the purpose of this ritual? Why create these beautiful, intricate figures only to destroy them? For decades, the leading theory was that they were used in healing rituals. The idea was proposed by Japanese archaeologists like Naoichi Kokubu. If a person had a pain in their leg, they would break the leg off a dogu figurine and throw it away, symbolically casting out the illness or injury. If a woman was having a difficult childbirth, the figurine might be broken to ensure a safe delivery. The dogu acted as a substitute, a vessel to take on human suffering. This would explain why so many are found broken, and why they often represent fertile or pregnant women. They were tied to life, health, and survival. This theory makes a lot of sense. It paints a picture of a people trying to control the dangers of their world through sympathetic magic. But there are problems with it. For one, if the figurines were used to heal specific body parts, you would expect the breaks to be random. But some studies of the breakage patterns suggest they are not random at all. Certain parts were broken more often than others. Another theory, supported by scholars like Junko Habu, is that the dogu were part of a fertility or agricultural ritual. They might represent earth mothers or goddesses. Breaking them and scattering the pieces over the ground could have been a way to ensure a good harvest. The body of the goddess was being returned to the earth to make it fertile. This connects to their female characteristics and the importance of new life and growth. A third possibility is that they were used in some kind of puberty or initiation rite. The breaking of the figurine could have symbolized the transition from one stage of life to another, for example, from girlhood to womanhood. The truth is, we do not know. The Jomon people left no writing, their beliefs are lost to time. All we have are these enigmatic broken figures. The goggle-eyed dogu known as Shikoki dogu from the late Jomon period are particularly strange. Their eyes are so exaggerated. Some have suggested they are meant to be snow goggles used to prevent snow blindness. Others have more fringe theories suggesting they represent ancient aliens in helmets. While archaeologists dismiss the alien theory, it highlights just how strange and hard to interpret these figures are. We are left with the core of the ritual creation and then destruction. It was an act that was repeated thousands upon thousands of times for thousands of years across an entire archipelago. It was clearly one of the most important parts of Jomon's spiritual life, and yet the meaning is completely lost to us. What specific belief required the ritual destruction of a sacred object? Was the act of breaking more important than the object itself? Were they trying to release a spirit trapped inside the clay? And what did they see when they looked into those huge goggle eyes? Number 11. What do the secret symbols of the Scottish stones mean? In the misty fields and hills of Scotland, there are standing stones. They are not like Stonehenge. They are not part of giant circles. Most are single slabs of rock, put there by a mysterious people the Romans called the Picts. The Picts lived in Scotland from the late Iron Age to the early Middle Ages, from about 300 AD to 900 AD. They were fierce warriors who fought off the Roman legions, but they were also incredible artists. And they left behind a puzzle that has stumped historians for centuries: the Pictish symbol stones. There are several hundred of these stones scattered across Scotland. They are carved with a strange and unique set of symbols. These are not random doodles. It is a specific recurring vocabulary of around 50 different symbols. There is the double disc and Z-rod, the crescent and V-rod, the Pictish beast, a strange creature that looks a bit like a dolphin or a seahorse, and a symbol that looks like a mirror and a comb. These symbols appear again and again in different combinations. The problem is, we have no idea what they mean. The Picts left no written language of their own that we can read. Their history was mostly written by their enemies, like the Romans and the later Irish and Anglo-Saxons. The stones are their only direct message to us, and we cannot understand it. For a long time, people thought it might be a form of writing, like hieroglyphic. But it does not seem to work that way. The symbols do not appear in long strings like sentences. They usually appear in pairs. In 2010, a team of researchers led by Rob Lee from the University of Exeter applied mathematical analysis to the symbols. They studied the frequency and pairing of the symbols and concluded that they do have the characteristics of a written language. But if it is a language, we still have no Rosetta Stone to help us translate it. The more common theory is that the symbols are not writing in the traditional sense, but a system of pictograms or ideograms. They represent concepts, people, or places. The archaeologist Anthony Jackson has long argued that the symbols represent a complex system of kinship and marriage alliances. In his view, a stone with two symbols might be recording the marriage of someone from the crescent family to someone from the double disc family. This would explain why symbols often appear in pairs. The stones would be acting as social and political markers, a way of recording lineage and status in a pre-literate society. Another compelling theory, supported by scholars like Martin Carver, is that the stones are memorials. They are tombstones. The symbols could represent the name, rank, or lineage of the person buried nearby. The mirror and comb symbol, which seems very personal, is often thought to represent a woman, perhaps one of high status. The Pictish beast might be the symbol of a specific clan or tribe, but even these theories have problems. Many of the stones are not associated with any burials, and the symbols are not just found on standing stones. They also appear on small stone discs, on metalwork, and carved into the walls of caves. This suggests their meaning was flexible and could be used in different contexts. The ritual aspect is also a mystery. Carving these stones was a major undertaking. It required skill, time, and resources. Who commissioned them? Who carved them? Were they erected during a specific ceremony? Were they places of worship, or simply markers of territory and identity? The mystery deepens when we consider the later stones. After the Picts began to convert to Christianity around the 7th century, they did not abandon their symbols. Instead, they created a new kind of stone. These were elaborate cross slabs with a Christian cross carved on one side and the old Pictish symbols carved on the other, often alongside Christian imagery and complex battle scenes. It is a strange fusion of old and new beliefs. It is as if they were saying, "We are Christians now, but we are still Picts." The old symbols were still important. They still meant something. But what? Was this a lost language or a complex social code? Did the Z-rod and V-rod that cut across other symbols represent some kind of action, like a marriage or a conflict? What was the Pictish beast, and why was it so important? And why, after centuries of use, did the symbols finally disappear when the Pictish kingdom merged with the kingdom of the Scots? The stone stands silent, holding a secret language we may never understand. Number 10 were the bog bodies human sacrifices. Across the bogs of northern Europe, from Ireland to Denmark to Germany, the earth sometimes gives up its dead. But these are not skeletons. The unique chemistry of peat bogs, low oxygen, high acidity, can preserve human bodies for thousands of years. Skin turns to leather, hair turns red, and the bodies are preserved in startling detail. These are the bog bodies, and they tell a story of violent, ritualistic death. One of the most famous is Tollen Man, discovered in Denmark in 1950. He looked so fresh that the people who found him thought he was a recent murder victim and called the police. But Tollen Man died over 2,400 years ago during the Iron Age. He was laid peacefully in the bog, his eyes closed as if sleeping. But around his neck was a braided leather noose, pulled tight. He had been hanged. His last meal, preserved in his stomach, was a simple porridge of barley and seeds. Another is Grauballe Man, also found in Denmark. He died around the same time. His throat had been cut from ear to ear with such force that it sliced into his vertebrae. He also had a fractured skull and a broken leg. This was not a peaceful death. And then there is Lindau Man, found in England in 1984. He was a young, healthy man. He had been hit on the head twice with a heavy object, garroted with a sinew cord, and had his throat cut. After all that, he was placed face down in the bog. There are hundreds of such bodies, and a disturbing number of them show signs of extreme violence. This was not warfare. The bodies were often naked, or clad in simple garments. They were placed carefully in the bogs. This was ritual. The question is, what kind of ritual? The dominant theory for decades has been that they were victims of human sacrifice. The Roman writer Tacitus, in his book Germania from 98 AD, described the Germanic tribes of the region. He wrote that they worshipped gods of nature and that they would execute traitors and deserters by drowning them in swamps under a wicker hurdle. He also mentioned sacrifices to the gods. Many scholars, including the Danish archaeologist P.V. Glob, who wrote the seminal book The Bog People, believe this is what we were seeing. The bogs were seen as sacred places, gateways to the underworld or the homes of deities. These people were killed as offerings to the gods, perhaps to ensure a good harvest, success in war, or to appease angry spirits. The triple death of Lindau Man, bludgeoning, strangulation, and throat cutting might have been a special offering to 3 different gods. But this theory is not without its critics. Some researchers, like the archaeologist Miranda Aldhouse-Green, agree with the sacrifice model but emphasize the symbolic nature. The bog is a place between worlds, not quite land and not quite water. Placing a body there was a powerful act. The victims might not have been ordinary people. They could have been kings, priests, or shamans who were sacrificed in times of crisis. The careful preservation of the body might have been important. A different perspective suggests these were not sacrifices, but executions. They were criminals, outcasts, or people who broke social taboos. The bog was a place to dispose of them, a place outside the normal boundaries of society. Their violent deaths were a punishment, and placing them in the bog ensured they would not receive a proper burial, perhaps preventing their spirits from returning to haunt the living. This lines up with what Tacitus wrote about criminals. The problem is that it is hard to tell the difference between a ritual sacrifice and a ritual execution. The two might have even been the same thing in their culture. A person who broke a religious taboo might have been sacrificed as a punishment. And there are other mysteries. Why were some bodies treated with such violence, while others, like Tollen Man, seem almost peaceful apart from the noose? Why were so many of them young, healthy men? Why did this practice seem to flourish during the Iron Age and then largely disappear? The bodies themselves cannot tell us what was in the minds of their killers. They cannot tell us if they went to their deaths willingly as a sacred duty or if they fought for their lives. Were these people honored offerings to the gods laid to rest in a sacred place? Or Were they despised outcasts disposed of in a watery grave? Did the community gather to watch these ritual killings? And when they looked down at a body sinking into the dark water of the bog, did they feel fear, piety, or relief? Number 9, were the Nazca heads trophies of war or revered ancestors? In the dry coastal plains of southern Peru, the Nazca culture flourished from around 100 BCE to 800 CE. They are famous for creating the Nazca lines, giant geoglyphs of animals and shapes etched into the desert floor. But they practice another ritual, one that is far more gruesome and personal, the taking and preparing of trophy heads. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these heads. They are real human heads, but they have been modified in a very specific way. A hole was drilled or punched into the forehead. Through this hole, a rope was threaded, so the head could be suspended or carried. The lips and eyes were often pinned shut with long cactus spines. The base of the skull was broken away, and the brain and other soft tissues were removed. The inside of the skull was often coated with resin. These were not just severed heads, they were carefully curated objects. For a long time, everyone assumed the answer was simple. The Nazca were warriors. These were the heads of their enemies, taken in battle as trophies. It was a display of power, a way to intimidate rivals. This idea was supported by Nazca pottery, which is decorated with vivid images of warriors, battles, and supernatural figures holding severed heads. That seemed like a clear-cut case of violent, ritualized warfare. But in the 1990s and 2000s, new scientific techniques began to tell a different story. Researchers at institutions like the Field Museum in Chicago began to analyze the chemical isotopes in the teeth of the trophy heads. Isotopes like strontium and oxygen are absorbed from the local food and water. They act like a geographic fingerprint, telling you where a person grew up. The expectation was that the trophy heads would have a different isotopic signature from the Nazca people, proving they were foreigners, enemies from other valleys. The results were shocking. A significant number of the trophy heads were from local people. They had grown up in the same areas, eating the same food, and drinking the same water as the Nazca who took their heads. They were not enemies from a distant land. They were neighbors. They were, in a sense, one of their own. This discovery, published in journals like the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology, forced a complete re-evaluation of the ritual. If these were not trophies of war, what were they? The focus shifted to a more religious or ceremonial explanation. Perhaps the heads were not about warfare, but about agriculture and fertility. The Nazca lived in a very arid environment. Water was life. Many of their rituals were likely focused on ensuring the rains would come and the rivers would flow. The heads might have been part of a powerful ritual to appease the gods and guarantee fertility. The images on their pottery often show plants sprouting from the mouths of severed heads, linking them directly to agriculture. So, who were these people? They might not have been enemies, in the way we think of it. Perhaps they were individuals from within the Nazca society itself, chosen for ritual sacrifice. Or maybe there was a form of ritual combat where the goal was not to kill an enemy, but to take a head for a specific ceremonial purpose. The people who lost their heads might not have been seen as vanquished foes, but as honored participants in a vital community ritual. But this raises even more disturbing questions. How were individuals chosen? Was it an honor to be selected, or were they captives from a neighboring village that was culturally similar but politically distinct? The fact that the eyes and mouths were pinned shut is also deeply symbolic. Was it to prevent the spirit of the dead from seeing or speaking to contain its power? Or was it to blind and silence an enemy soul? The debate still rages. Donald Proulx, a leading scholar on Nazca culture, has argued for a more nuanced view, suggesting the heads could be from both warfare and ritual contexts. It was likely a complex practice that changed over time. We are left with these silent, staring heads. Were they symbols of military victory meant to inspire terror in the hearts of enemies? Or were they sacred objects revered as sources of fertility and life, their owners possibly even honored for their sacrifice? Was the act of taking a head a moment of rage and conquest, or a solemn, sacred duty? What did it mean to carry another person's head by a rope threaded through their forehead? Number 8, what happened inside the secret temples of Mithras? Deep beneath the streets of modern cities like Rome and London, there are hidden temples. They are small, dark, and windowless. They look like caves. Down the center of the long, narrow room, there is an aisle. On either side are raised stone benches where the worshippers would recline. At the far end, there is an altar, and on that altar there is always the same strange image: a young man in a floppy cap, plunging a dagger into the neck of a bull. A dog and a snake lick the bull's blood. A scorpion clamps onto its genitals. This is the central icon of one of the Roman Empire's most mysterious religions, the cult of Mithras. The Mithraic mysteries flourished in the Roman Empire from the 1st to the 4th century AD. It was incredibly popular, especially among Roman soldiers, merchants, and administrators. Hundreds of Mithraea, their temples, have been found from Britain to Syria. But despite its popularity, we know almost nothing about what they actually believed or what they did in their secret rituals. There are no sacred texts, there are no Mithraic gospels or holy books that explain their theology. All of our information comes from 3 sources: the ruins of their temples, the images they left behind, and the writings of their enemies, the Christians, who saw them as a demonic pagan rival. What we can piece together is this: it was a men-only cult, it was a mystery religion, meaning its secrets were only revealed to initiates who had gone through a series of tests and ceremonies. There were 7 grades of initiation, each named after a celestial body and a guardian god: Korax Raven, Nymphus Bride, Miles Soldier, Leo Lion, Persis Persian, Heliodromus Sunrunner, and finally Pater Father. We know these names from graffiti and inscriptions found in the Mithraea. The rituals took place in the dark, cave-like temples, which were meant to represent the cosmos. The central act of their belief system, depicted in the Tauroctani scene, was Mithras slaying the sacred bull, and scholars like David Ulansey and Roger Beck have proposed complex theories about what this image means. It is not just a random act of violence, it is an astronomical map. Ulansey, in his book The Origins of the Mithraic Mysteries, argues that Mithras was not just a sun god, but a powerful being capable of moving the entire universe. The bull represents the constellation Taurus, and the other animals, the dog Canis Minor, the snake Hydra, the scorpion Scorpio, also represent constellations. The bull slaying, he argues, represents the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that changes which constellation the sun rises in at the spring equinox. Mithras was the god who had the power to perform this cosmic shift. This is a powerful theory, but it is just a theory. We do not know for sure. The rituals themselves are a complete blank. The benches in the temples suggest the initiates shared a communal meal. Perhaps they ate a ritual feast, symbolically partaking in the power of the slain bull. The different grades of initiation likely involve trials and ordeals. Some Mithraea have pits that might have been used for tests of courage. Depictions show initiates being blindfolded, led by a guide. The Christian writers claim that Mithraism was a cheap copy of their own religion. They pointed to similarities like a ritual meal of bread and wine, a belief in a savior figure, and a Sunday holy day. Mithras was associated with the sun, Sol Invictus. But these accounts are hostile and biased. The central ritual remains the biggest mystery. What was the experience of being an initiate in a dark underground temple lit only by torches? What stories were told? What oaths were sworn? The bull-slaying scene is always the centerpiece, so the reenactment or commemoration of that event must have been the core of their most important ceremony. Did they sacrifice actual bulls in these small enclosed spaces? The archaeological evidence for this is scant, but it is possible. What secret knowledge was passed down through the 7 grades of initiation? What did a father of the cult know that a soldier did not? Why was it so appealing to soldiers? And what promise did it hold for them in the afterlife? And what was the ultimate meaning of the bull slaying a creation story, an astronomical event, or a promise of salvation through sacrifice? The secrets of Mithras were well kept, and they died with the last of his followers. Number 7. What did the initiates see at the Eleusinian Mysteries? For almost 2,000 years, the most famous and sacred religious ritual in ancient Greece was held in the town of Eleusis, just outside of Athens. These were the Eleusinian Mysteries, a secret initiation ceremony in honor of the goddesses Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone. To be initiated at Eleusis was one of the highest spiritual experiences a Greek could have. Famous figures from Plato to the Roman Emperor Augustus were initiates. To reveal what happened during the ritual was a crime punishable by death. And to this day, nobody is entirely sure what the secret was. The mysteries were based on the story of Demeter and Persephone. As told in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, the god of the underworld. Her mother, Demeter, was so overcome with grief that she neglected her duties as goddess of agriculture. The earth became barren, and humanity began to starve. Zeus, king of the gods, finally intervened and forced Hades to release Persephone. But because Persephone had eaten a few pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she was forced to return there for a part of each year. This story explains the seasons. When Persephone is in the underworld, Demeter grieves and it is winter. When she returns, Demeter rejoices, and it is spring and summer. The Eleusinian Mysteries were a ritual reenactment of this story. They promised their initiates a better life, and more importantly, a happy afterlife. Initiates were said to lose their fear of death. The rituals took place once a year and lasted for 9 days. We know about the public parts of the ceremony. There were processions from Athens to Eleusis, ritual cleansings in the sea, sacrifices, and feasts. But the most important part happened inside the telesterion, the great initiation hall at Eleusis. This was the secret part. Only those who had been initiated were allowed inside. Inside the telesterion, the initiates, known as Mistai, would experience the climax of the ritual. The ancient sources give us only tantalizing cryptic hints. They speak of 3 stages: dramata, things done; legomena, things said; and deiknomena, things shown. The initiates would witness some kind of pageant or performance that reenacted the story of Demeter and Persephone. There was a sacred story told by the Hierophant, the high priest, and there was a final, overwhelming revelation. Aristotle wrote that the initiates did not learn something so much as they experienced or suffered something. It was a transformative emotional experience, not an intellectual one. What was it that they saw? This is the great mystery. The ancient Christian writers, who despised the pagan mysteries, claimed it was a simple thing the Hierophant would reveal an ear of grain that had been reaped in silence. This would symbolize the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, just like a seed that must be buried die to produce new life. This is known as the ear of grain theory. It sounds a bit anticlimactic for such a profound experience. Could this simple act really have been the secret that was kept for 2 millennia? A more controversial theory was proposed by the scholar Carl Ruck, the ethnobotanist R. Gordon Wasson, and the chemist Albert Hofmann, the man who discovered LSD. In their book, The Road to Eleusis, they argued that the secret was not something seen, but something consumed. They proposed that the initiates drank a special potion called the Kion. We know from the Homeric hymn that Demeter drank a kykeon made of barley, water, and mint. The authors argue that the barley used at Eleusis was likely infected with ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains. Ergot contains psychoactive alkaloids that are chemically similar to LSD. If this theory is correct, the initiates at Eleusis were undergoing a powerful collective psychedelic experience. This would certainly explain the profound, life-altering nature of the vision they experienced. The deiknomena, the things shown, would have been powerful hallucinations, a direct encounter with the divine, or a journey to the underworld and back with Persephone. But there is no direct proof for this theory. No archaeological evidence of ergot-infected barley has been found, though it would be difficult to detect after so long. Many classical scholars reject the theory, arguing that the spiritual power of the ritual did not require a drug. So we are left with a secret that was never written down. Was the ultimate revelation a simple, profound symbol like an ear of grain? Or was it a chemically induced vision that took the initiates to the brink of the underworld and back? What happened in the dark of the telesterion that made hardened Roman emperors and skeptical philosophers weep with joy and lose all fear of death? The final secret of Eleusis was so well guarded that it has been lost forever. Number 6, what afterlife instructions are written on the Orphic gold tablets? Imagine you have just died. You are a soul disoriented, traveling through the darkness of the underworld. You are thirsty, you see a spring, but a sign warns you not to drink from it. You must find another spring, a different source of water. If you can find it and speak the right words, you will be saved. You will join the heroes and the gods. This is the scenario described on a series of incredible artifacts found in graves across the ancient Greek world, from southern Italy to Crete to northern Greece. They are known as the Orphic gold tablets. They are small, thin sheets of gold foil, about the size of a business card. They are inscribed with Greek text, and they were buried with the dead, often placed in their mouths or on their chests. They are a set of instructions for the soul on how to navigate the afterlife. These tablets are linked to Orphism, a mystery religion in ancient Greece. Orphism was based on the teachings of the mythical poet and musician Orpheus, who was said to have traveled to the underworld and returned. Unlike mainstream Greek religion, Orphics had a complex theology. They believed in reincarnation, metempsychosis, and the idea that the human soul was divine, but it was trapped in the body as if in a prison. The goal was to purify the soul through a series of lifetimes, so it could finally escape the grievous cycle of rebirth and achieve a state of divine bliss. The gold tablets were the soul's guidebook for its most important journey. They are written in the first person, as if the soul itself is speaking. They contain passwords, directions, and declarations. One famous tablet from a grave in Petelia, Italy, begins, "You will find on the left of the house of Hades a spring, and by its side a white cypress standing. Do not even go near this spring, but you will find another, from the lake of memory, from which cold water flows." The soul is instructed to approach the guardians of this second spring and speak a specific phrase. "I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven. This you yourselves know. I am parched with thirst and am dying, but give me quickly the cold water flowing from the lake of memory." Once the soul drinks from this water, it will be saved. Other tablets contain different formulas. Some have the soul declare its purity. "I have paid the penalty for unrighteous deeds." Another has the soul declare its divine nature directly to the queen of the underworld, Persephone. "I come from the pure, O pure queen of the earthly ones." These tablets are incredibly rare and personal. They give us a direct glimpse into the hopes and fears of individual people about what comes after death. And they show a belief system where your fate in the afterlife was not just left to the gods, you had to play an active role. You needed the right knowledge, the right gnosis to navigate the dangers of the underworld and claim your rightful divine heritage. But the ritual surrounding these tablets is a mystery. Who wrote them? Were they mass-produced by Orphic priests, or were they custom-made for each individual? How did a person become an Orphic initiate? What rituals did they perform in life to ensure they would be worthy of the instructions on the tablet? The texts themselves are also puzzling. The scholar Günter Zunz, in his classic study Persephone, analyzed the different versions of the text and found that they seemed to come from several different traditions, not just one unified Orphic church. The language is poetic and archaic. The geography of the underworld they describe, the two springs, the white cypress is not found in mainstream Greek myths like the works of Homer or Hesiod. It is a unique, secret geography known only to the initiates. And what did the family of the deceased do? Was there a specific funeral rite for an Orphic? Did a priest whisper the instructions into the ear of the dying person? Was the act of placing the tablet in the mouth a final, magical act to ensure the soul would be able to speak the words when it arrived in the underworld? The tablets are a powerful testament to a deep human desire to have some control over what happens after we die. But the community that created them, the rituals they practice, and the full scope of their beliefs remain shrouded in shadow. What other secret knowledge did the Orphics possess? Were there different levels of initiation that came with different, more detailed maps of the afterlife? And for the person lying on their deathbed, what was the feeling of holding this small piece of gold? Was it a guarantee of eternal life, or just a desperate hope whispered into the darkness? Number 5, why did medieval Europeans put bricks in the mouths of the dead? In 2006, archaeologists were excavating a 16th century mass grave on the island of Lazaretto Nuovo in the Venetian lagoon. The grave contained victims of one of the terrible plague epidemics that swept through Europe. But one skeleton stood out. It was an adult female, and her jaw was forced open by a brick that had been shoved into her mouth. This was not an accident, it was a deliberate act. The discovery, led by archaeologist Matteo Barini, made headlines around the world. It was a vampire burial, and it was not the first of its kind. Across Europe, from Poland to Ireland, archaeologists have been finding graves from the medieval and early modern periods that show a profound fear of the dead. These are known as deviant burials, and they are evidence of a widespread ritual practice born of terror. The belief was that certain people, after they died, could return from the grave to prey on the living. There were not vampires in the modern, Dracula sense of the word. They were called revenants, or Noxers German, for night devourers. The belief was that these creatures would lie in their graves and chew on their own burial shrouds. This magical chewing would somehow draw the life force from their living relatives, causing them to sicken and die. It was also believed that they could spread disease, like the plague. To stop a suspected revenant, people would reopen the grave and perform a ritual to neutralize the threat. The brick in the mouth of the Venetian vampire was one such ritual. It was meant to physically prevent the corpse from chewing its shroud and harming the living. It was a way to pin the evil down. Other deviant burials showed different rituals. In a cemetery in Drosko, Poland, researchers led by Marek Polson have found skeletons from the 17th and 18th centuries with sickles placed across their necks or over their hips. The idea was that if the corpse tried to rise from its grave, it would decapitate itself. Some bodies were buried with a large stone placed under their chin to prevent them from opening their mouths. Others were buried face down, so if they tried to dig their way out, they would only go deeper into the earth. Some were pinned to the grave with iron stakes driven through their chests or legs. In the most extreme cases, they were decapitated and the head was buried between the legs. These rituals were not performed by pagan cults, they were performed by Christian communities. This was a folk belief that existed alongside, and sometimes in defiance of, official church doctrine. The church taught that the dead should be respected and left to await the final resurrection. But when a plague struck a village or a family began to die off one by one, fear and superstition took over. People needed to do something. They needed a ritual to fight back against the unseen evil they believed was emanating from the grave. But how did they decide who was a potential revenant? This is the great unknown. The Venetian skeleton was a woman. The Polish vampire burials included both men and women. There's often nothing unusual about the skeletons themselves. They were not social outcasts in life. Sometimes, the first person to die in a plague outbreak was suspected. Other times, it might have been someone who was unpopular, or a stranger, or someone who had died a sudden, violent death. A corpse that did not decompose as expected, or that was found to be bloated with gas when the grave was reopened, could be taken as a sign of vampirism. The ritual of reopening a grave and killing a corpse is a chilling one to imagine. It would have been a terrifying community event, likely performed at night. Who made the decision to do it? Was it a village elder, a local priest looking the other way, or a mob driven by fear? What words were said during the ritual? What was the psychological state of the people who had to dig up their recently deceased neighbor and mutilate their body? These burials are a stark reminder of how thin the veneer of civilization can be. They show a world where the dead were not necessarily at peace, and the line between the living and the dead was dangerously blurred. Why was a brick the chosen weapon in Venice while a sickle was used in Poland? Were there regional variations in the anti-vampire rituals? How widespread was this practice, and how many more of these terrified burials are yet to be found? And what was it like to live in a world where you truly believed your dead neighbor might be the cause of all your suffering? Number 4, who was the priest king of the Indus Valley? In 1927, archaeologists excavating the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in what is now Pakistan found a small, broken statue. It was only about 7 inches tall, made of soapstone. But it was one of the most remarkable artifacts ever recovered from the Indus Valley civilization. It depicted a man with a neatly trimmed beard, a headband with a circular ornament on it, and a robe decorated with a trefoil 3-leaf clover pattern. His eyes are half closed, as if in a state of meditation or trance. He has an air of calm authority. He was nicknamed the Priest King. The Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization, was one of the world's great ancient urban cultures. It flourished from about 2500 BCE to 1900 BCE, at the same time as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. It was huge, covering an area larger than both of its contemporaries combined. Its cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of urban planning with grid-like streets, advanced water management systems, and massive public buildings. But it is a civilization of ghosts. We know almost nothing about their social structure, their politics, or their religion. The main reason for this is that we cannot read their writing. The Indus people had a script found on thousands of small stone seals, but it has never been deciphered. There are no long texts, no religious scriptures, no royal decrees. All we have are these short, enigmatic inscriptions on the seals, usually alongside an image of an animal, most commonly a one-horned creature that looks like a unicorn. This is why the priest king statue is so important and so frustrating. It seems to show a ruler. He looks like someone in charge. In Egypt, we have thousands of images of pharaohs. In Mesopotamia, we have statues of kings and law codes like that of Hammurabi. We know who their rulers were, but in the entire Indus Valley, this one small broken statue is our best and only candidate for a portrait of a leader. Was he a king, or a priest, or both? The name priest king was given to him because in Mesopotamia the rulers often had both political and religious authority. It seemed like a good guess, the man's meditative expression and the formal robe suggest a religious role. But we have no other evidence of a monarchy. There are no grand palaces, no lavish royal tombs. The cities are remarkably uniform and egalitarian in their layout. There is no huge gap between the houses of the rich and the poor, unlike in Egypt or Mesopotamia. This has led to a major debate among scholars. Some, like the archaeologist Jonathan Mark Knoyer, believe the Indus Valley was not a unified kingdom, but a collection of city-states, each ruled by an elite class of merchants, landowners, and religious leaders. The priest king might have been one of these elite figures, but not an absolute monarch. Others have proposed more radical theories. Perhaps the Indus Valley was a faceless state, run by a council or a committee with no single ruler. The emphasis was on civic order and social equality, not on the glorification of a king. The rituals of this civilization are a complete blank. The great public buildings, like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a large waterproof brick pool, were almost certainly used for ritual purification. But what kind of rituals? Who participated? The thousands of stone seals with their animal figures must have been part of an administrative or economic ritual. They were likely used to stamp clay tags on goods to show ownership or to seal documents. But the imagery on them, the unicorn, the bull, the seated yogi, like figure some have identified as a prototype of the Hindu god, Shiva is clearly religious. What did the unicorn symbolize? What was its connection to the person whose name was written in the script above it? The trefoil pattern on the priest king's robe is also a mystery. It is a symbol found in Mesopotamia and Egypt, where it is associated with divinity and the heavens. Did the Indus people share this belief? Was the man in the statue performing a celestial ritual? Without the ability to read their script, we are left guessing. The priest king is the face of a civilization without a known face. He is a leader without a known name, from a kingdom without a known political structure, who worshiped gods without known myths. Was he a real person, or an idealized image of a spiritual leader? If he was a ruler, why is he the only one we have ever found? Did the Indus rituals focus on water purification and commercial integrity, or did they have a complex pantheon of gods we know nothing about? And what secrets are locked away in the tiny symbols on their thousands of stone seals? Number 3, why did the Olmec mutilate their own giant statues? Long before the Maya or the Aztecs, the first great civilization of Mesoamerica emerged in the tropical lowlands of south-central Mexico. They are known as the Olmec. They flourished from around 1400 BCE to 400 BCE. They built the first major cities in the region, like San Lorenzo and La Venta. They may have been the first civilization in the Americas to develop a writing system, and they created one of the most stunning and enigmatic art forms of the ancient world, the Olmec colossal heads. These heads are enormous. They can be up to 11 feet tall and weigh as much as 50 tons. They are carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, which was quarried in mountains over 100 miles away from the cities where they were found. Moving these massive stones through jungle and swamp would have been an incredible feat of engineering. 17 of these heads have been found. They are all portraits of men with fleshy cheeks, flat noses, and slightly crossed eyes. Each head is unique. Each one wears a distinctive helmet or headdress. It is almost certain that these are portraits of powerful Olmec rulers. They are powerful, individualistic, and awe-inspiring. They were meant to project power and authority. But here is the mystery. Many of these heads were deliberately damaged, and then they were buried. Archaeologists like Michael D. Coe, who excavated San Lorenzo, found that the heads were not just toppled over. They show signs of being intentionally mutilated. Chunks were knocked off, faces were pockmarked. Then they were carefully arranged in lines or groups and buried as part of a massive ritual act of termination. The entire city of San Lorenzo, around 900 BCE, seems to have undergone a ritual destruction of its monuments before it was abandoned. Why would a civilization invest such enormous resources into creating these magnificent portraits of their rulers, only to systematically destroy and bury them? For a long time, the leading theory was iconoclasm. Perhaps there was an invasion, and the conquerors destroyed the symbols of the old regime. Or maybe there was an internal rebellion, and the common people rose up and smashed the images of their despised rulers. But the evidence does not really fit this theory. The mutilation seems careful and ritualized, not the result of a chaotic mob. And the burial of the heads was done with great ceremony. It was an organized event. This has led to a different theory, one that is much stranger. The ritual destruction may have been part of the life cycle of the monuments themselves. Some scholars, like Anne Cyphers, now believe that the heads were not destroyed out of hatred, but as part of a sacred ritual. When a ruler died, his portrait head had to be killed as well. The spirit or life force of the ruler was believed to reside in the statue. To end its power, and to allow for a new ruler to take his place, the old monument had to be ritually decommissioned. The mutilation was a way of neutralizing its power. The burial was a way of putting it to rest, just like the ruler it represented. Another possibility is that the stones themselves were considered sacred and had a life cycle. The Olmec often recarved older monuments. A throne could be recarved into a colossal head. A head could be broken up and used in the foundation of a new building. The ritual destruction might have just been one stage in the ongoing life of the sacred basalt stone, preparing it for its next incarnation. We also do not know the ritual of their creation. How did they move these stones? What ceremonies were performed when a new head was completed and set in place? The heads are so naturalistic it seems they must have been carved by artists who knew the rulers personally. The act of mutilation and burial is a ritual that speaks of a complex relationship with power, death, and imagery. It suggests that for the Olmec, these stone heads were not just representations of their leaders, they were the leaders, imbued with a powerful and potentially dangerous life force that had to be controlled. Was the destruction of a colossal head an act of political succession, a way to close the book on a previous reign? Or was it a religious act, releasing the spirit from the stone? Did the Olmec people watch this ritual with sorrow for a dead king, or with fear of the supernatural power being unleashed? And what kind of society venerates its rulers with such monumental effort, only to methodically break them apart? Number 2. What was the purpose of the sunken amphitheaters of Caral? High in a desert valley in Peru, about 120 miles north of Lima, lies the ruins of a city that should not exist. It is the city of Caral, and it is the oldest city in the Americas. The civilization of Caral, also known as the Norte Chico civilization, emerged around 3000 BCE, at the same time the first pyramids were being built in Egypt. It was a large, complex society with monumental architecture, large-scale agriculture, and a peaceful trade-based economy. The discovery and excavation of Caral by archaeologist Ruth Shady in the 1990s completely rewrote the timeline of civilization in the Americas. The city of Caral is dominated by 6 large platform pyramids, but perhaps its most distinctive features are its sunken circular plazas or amphitheaters. These are large, round, sunken courts, usually located at the foot of the main pyramids. They have staircases leading down into them and benches or tiers of seating around the edge. They were clearly places for people to gather. But for what? This is the central mystery of Caral. The civilization that built these cities left behind no visual art. There are no paintings, no sculptures, no carvings on the walls that give us any clue about their religion or their rituals. They also had no pottery, which is very unusual for a civilization of this size. And like all pre-Incan civilizations in South America, they had no system of writing. Their beliefs are a complete enigma. All we have are the silent, empty spaces of their architecture. The sunken circular plazas were clearly the heart of their ritual life. Ruth Shady and her team believed these were religious and social centers where the whole community would gather. They have found evidence of large fires being lit in the center of the plazas. They have also found musical instruments, including flutes made from condor and pelican bones, and trumpets made from deer and llama bones. This suggests the rituals involve fire, music, and chanting. The acoustics of the circular plazas are very good. A speaker or a musician in the center could be heard by everyone gathered on the benches. It must have been a powerful, immersive experience. It was a way to bring the community together. But what were they celebrating? What gods were they worshiping? We have no idea. The focus on fire seems important. It might have been a ritual of purification or an offering to a sun god or an earth deity. The music might have been used to induce a trance-like state. The society of Caral also seems to have been remarkably peaceful. There are no walls around the city. No weapons had been found. Their economy was based on growing cotton and trading it with coastal communities for fish. It seems to have been a society governed by trade and religion, not by warfare. Perhaps the rituals in the plazas were about reinforcing social harmony and celebrating the economic success of the community. In some of the buildings, archaeologists have found small caches of offerings. These include collections of cut grasses wrapped in string, known as hikras. These seem to be a form of ritual offering, but their meaning is lost. They also found the body of a single baby, buried as a sacrifice or offering. This is the only evidence of human sacrifice found so far, suggesting it was not a common practice. The plazas are the stage, but the play is lost. We can imagine the scene: the whole community gathered in the sunken plaza at dusk. A huge bonfire roars in the center. The sound of bone flutes and trumpets echoes off the pyramid walls. The leaders of the community, perhaps a class of priests, lead the ceremony. But what are they saying? What are they asking their gods for? Rain, a good cotton harvest, social unity. Why was the circular, sunken shape so important to them that they built these plazas in all of their cities? Was the ritual a performance for the people, or was it a way for the people to participate in a collective spiritual experience? What stories and myths were told around those sacred fires under the desert stars 5,000 years ago? The answers are as lost as the smoke from those ancient fires. Number one, what do the clothes of the Tarim mummies tell us? In the Tarim Basin of western China, in the vast and unforgiving Taklamakan Desert, archaeologists have found hundreds of mummies. But these are not like the mummies of Egypt. They were not deliberately embalmed. They were preserved naturally by the dry, salty desert soil and the freezing winter winds. Some are over 4,000 years old, and they do not look like the people we would expect to find in ancient China. They have long noses, deep-set eyes, and reddish blonde or brown hair. They are Caucasians. They are the Tarim mummies. Their existence, first widely publicized by the work of scholars like Victor Mayer, proves that people of European descent were living and dying in this remote corner of China during the Bronze Age. They were likely migrants from the west, perhaps from Siberia or Central Asia. They were part of a lost world that existed along the routes that would one day become the Silk Road. But the real mystery is not just who they were, but what they believed. Their graves give us our only clues, and their burial rituals were unlike any others. The most famous of the mummies, a woman known as the Beauty of Lulin, was buried in a simple pit. She was wrapped in a wool and felt cloak and wore leather moccasins. A woven basket was placed by her side containing grains of wheat. This suggests a belief in an afterlife where she would need food. A feather was placed in her hair. But other burials are far more bizarre. In one cemetery, a male mummy, known as Churchin Man, was buried with his head resting on a wooden pillow. His face was painted with yellow and red spirals. He was buried with 10 hats. Why 10 hats? No one knows. He was also buried with a baby, who was not his own child, based on DNA analysis. The baby had a pillow made from the hide of a brown calf and a drinking cup made from a sheep's horn. The most elaborate burials are found at a site called Small River Cemetery No. 5. Here, the graves are marked not by stones, but by huge wooden posts, some of them 13 feet high. The posts are shaped like giant oars or phallic symbols. The entire cemetery looks like a forest of petrified oars rising from the desert sand. Each coffin is shaped like a boat and is covered with a cowhide. It seems they believed the dead were taking a final journey by river, even though they lived in one of the driest places on earth. The grave goods are equally strange. Many of the female mummies are buried with small woven effigies, crude human figures. They are also buried with cone-shaped hats that look like witch hats from a fairy tale. These hats are symbols of power and high status, but what kind of power? Were these women priestesses or shamans? The clothing itself is a part of the ritual. The Tarim people were master weavers. They wore brightly colored wool textiles with complex plaid and twill patterns that are startlingly similar to ancient Celtic tartans found in Europe. Was this a shared cultural heritage, or did two separate cultures invent the same patterns by coincidence? Their clothes were clearly a huge part of their identity. The rituals of these people are a puzzle made of disparate, strange pieces. A belief in a final boat journey through the desert. A reverence for phallic symbols and giant oars. The use of spiral face paint. The ritual burial of multiple hats. The significance of the tall, pointed hats for women of power. We can only guess at the story that connects these pieces. The boat burials might be a memory of a homeland with great rivers, a tradition carried with them into the desert. The phallic posts could be symbols of a male fertility cult. The spiral face paint could be a way to prepare the body for a spiritual journey. But these are just guesses. We have no texts, no oral traditions, nothing to guide us. We only have these silent people dressed in their beautiful plaid woolens, sleeping in their boat-shaped coffins in a desert that has not seen a river in millennia. What did the feather and the beauty of Llewellyn's hair signify? Why was a man buried with 10 hats and with a baby that was not his? What rituals were performed in the forest of phallic posts? And what did the women in the pointed hats do? The Terra mummies are a tantalizing glimpse of a lost branch of the human family, and their bizarre rituals are a final, whispered secret that the desert has kept for 4,000 years.